I think the spirit of this island is female, and she's not very subtle in her seduction. Reminds me of a Sega dance on a sultry summer's night on the beach. Really not subtle at all.
She was a girl with a divided heart, like the light and the dark, a divided heart. Between two continents and somewhere far home, but where it really lay was deep within the soul. But where it really lay was deep within the soul.
And welcome to episode 9 of Micki Pistorius Profiler on Record. And 9 is just what episode 9 of the television series Catch Me a Killer. And this is the second episode of the Phoenix serial killer case. So just to recap, Erica went to Micki's hotel room and she found Micki to be missing. So where did Micki flee to? Well, she went to Mark, the person that she loved and that she trusted. And there was a familiarity about Mark. So she switched from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic, where she could relax with. She felt safe in his arms, and they walked in nature, and she was restored, and he was nurturing, and even nourished her. He cooked her potjiekos. Potjiekos is a South African version of a stew. That's the closest that I could get to it. So little did he know, or she know, what was to follow a few days later. She swam in the lake and she was revived and she found the light and everything. So she goes back to the murder and robbery. So it all seems very idyllic in the series. And was there a Mark in my life at that stage? Yes, there was. She was. But in the meantime, Erica had to put out all the fires and cover for Micki. Micki's respite was short-lived because as she got back to the murder and robbery offices, she walked in and there was this terrible, terrible smell. And I remember that. The scene is historically accurate. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it was really terrible. And I walked into one of the boardrooms and there was this long table, and on the table were all these little prime stoves with pots on them boiling. And I looked at the detective and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, have a look." And inside these pots were the skulls of the victims cooking. And remember, the mortuary attendants were on strike, so the detectives cooked the skulls to get rid of the flesh, deflesh the skulls, so that we had clean skulls, which would then go to the forensic guys who could reconstruct the skulls and would try and identify these people. So that was a real life horror potjiekos scene that I walked into. And sometimes I think there's no need to sensationalize or to dramatize my life because it was bad as it was. So all the good work that Mark had done over that weekend just went down the drain right there, and the PTSD dragging, of course, reared his ugly head again. I still don't eat red meat. It reminds me of burnt flesh bodies, of skulls cooking in pots and rotten meat, etc. So at a bride, I would really prefer not to see the meat, and especially when people have a lamb on the spit, the smell of mutton or lamb, I can really smell it on their breath. So I try not to attend those and I avoid it. So maybe a note to future Marks. It's not such a good idea taking me to a steakhouse. I don't like burgers with mincemeat. So I'm better now, and 30 years later, and I don't mind if people eat meat around me. Don't mind, as long as I don't have to work with raw meat myself. Still don't like mutton or lamb. My own horrible Silence of the Lambs. Hello, Louise. So in any case, so getting back to this TV series, in the cane fields, they were lucky enough and they found a condom on one of the crime scenes, and they extracted the DNA, and they went through previous records and they came upon a previous rape case and identified the suspect there as Sipho Twala. So now we had a name. remember this killer had a very particular, peculiar fantasy and ritual on his crime scenes. Now, I did promise you some educational value on fetishes and paraphilias. Now, Melanie Klein was a psychoanalyst, and she developed a theory on the fantasies that children would develop during Freud's psychosexual developmental disorders. So if we go to the first one, the oral phase, this is what Melanie Klein says. He has certain oral sadistic fantasies of quite a definite character, seeming to form a link between the oral sucking and the oral biting stages, in which he gets possession of the contents of his mother's breast by sucking and scooping it out. The desire to suck and scoop out is first directed to the breast, and then it soon extends to the inside of her body. Now, it might seem incomprehensible that a child before the age of 2 have such horrible fantasies. But remember, those fantasies are subconscious and they will stay suppressed. However, in the case of Stuart Wilkin, as we have seen, they were not suppressed. Stuart did attack the breast, and he cut them to get to the milk, and he bit and he ate the nipples. So Melanie Klein's theories are not that far-fetched when we actually see them acted out in reality on a crime scene. So in the anal phase as well, when young children happen to see or hear their parents having sex, they interpret this as an act of aggression, perhaps because of what they hear or the video of what is happening there. In any case, what Melanie Klein says, the child fantasizes that the parents destroy each other through their genitals or excreta. The methods of destruction become more sophisticated as the child matures. Paranoia develops where the child in his fantasies attacks the insides of the mother's body and the penis there by poisonous and dangerous excreta. Delusions of persecution flow from the anxiety provoked by this kind of attack, and the child expects punishment from the parents. So often when we listen or watch children of around 4 play, they make these explosive noises. It's all push, push, destruction. Now, their weapon that they use in their fantasies is their own excreta, because that is the only thing that their body can produce, the only thing that they have control about. And the anal phase is all about control. So we can see here that when we see that on crime scenes, it actually makes sense. And on some crime scenes, we also find excreta and feces on top of the bodies. So this is quite normal for children to have this. Don't be that alarmed, because it is suppressed. And especially when they reach the latency phase, which is about 6 to 12. And then they go to school and they learn to socialize and they identify with the father figure, because the father represents society out there. So it is unacceptable to society to have these fantasies, and they are repressed. Except that the serial killer does not go through that. He doesn't identify with the father figure. He doesn't develop compassion for other people. So these fantasies stay conscious, and that is why they start acting them out. Now, serial killers may act out parts of their fantasies at first, or they may act out the whole fantasy in one go. Some serial killers had no sexual contact with women during puberty, and they relied on fantasy, like the Donnybrook serial killer, and some had sexual contact while they were fantasizing. Now, as teenagers already, the serial killers are preoccupied with these fantasies, and they may begin rehearsing them with dolls or victims or animals. Some serial killers prefer to act out their fantasies on bodies, dead bodies, and they collect bodies and they keep them with them in their homes, like Jeffrey Dahmer or Dennis Nielsen. And this is what Dennis Nielsen said. He said, "I did it all for me, purely selfishly. I worship the art and the act of death over and over. It is as simple as that. I was honoring myself, enjoying the extremity of the death act itself. If I did it to myself, I could only experience it once. I did it to others, and I experienced death over and over and over again." Now, Dennis Nielsen was a British homosexual serial killer. So, what is interesting is in our fantasies, we are the heroes, as I said before. Serial killers are not just the heroes in their fantasies. They are omnipotent. They are gods because they have the power of life over death in their fantasies. Now, research has also shown us that fantasies comprise 70% of human sexuality. The remaining 30% is comprised by biological or physiological stimulation. So, a serial killer is not horrified by what he sees on a crime scene because he's seen it so many times before in his fantasy. And the higher a person's IQ, the more sophisticated a fantasy will be, and the more premeditated the crime scene would be. Now, Sipho Twala used strips of clothing that he made from women's attire, and what I found very interesting is the legs of the victims would be bounded very close together. So I couldn't figure out how could he rape somebody if her legs were that close. And then one of the Zulu detectives told me that in the Zulu, there is a Zulu custom that if you take a woman's virginity before you marry her, then you have to pay a fine. So this is taboo. And he said if the legs are that close together, then there's actually a little orifice at the top that he could penetrate without taking the virginity. So now we confirmed this was a Zulu man. He was living in the area. He had access to these sugarcane fields. He saw them, he knew them, he frequented them. And one of the victim's sisters told us that he promised the women work. She was a good woman that came forward, so we know that. So he also, as I said, made this harness that went around her head. And then he had this little ball that he folded like a little samosa to put in her mouth. Now, the thing is also, the pathologist reports said that these women were severely concussed. In other words, he hit them so hard that they were unconscious or stunned when they were on the crime scene. So why would you tie up somebody or also press their body between the two stalks that they can't move if in any case they were incapacitated? Why would you put this little ball in her mouth to prevent her from speaking? She couldn't speak in any case. There's only one reason, because this is a fantasy that was compelled to act out on the crime scene. So I realized also that with this little ball, he put it in her mouth to stop her from speaking, because there were some women somewhere in his life that hurt him to such an extent that on the victims who were substitutes, he had to silence her over and over and over again. Remember previously in one of the other episodes, we spoke about that the brain can interpret psychological and emotional pain as bad as physical pain. So something happened to this particular killer. So clearly, Twala had a fetish about female clothing. So let's look at, as I promised you, the educational value of fetishes and paraphilias. So paraphilias are sexual disorders, and they are characterized by sexual fantasies and intense sexual urges and practices, which are usually repetitive, and it becomes a substitute for normal sex. People are usually very secretive about their paraphilias, and the person can only become sexually aroused when the paraphilia is present. Paraphilias are usually not transgressing the law. Now, sexual bondage. Sexual bondage is not just to prevent a person from moving, from escaping. The sadists derive pleasure from the dominance of tying a person up and their helplessness watching them. But we get different types of bondage. Motoric bondage is if you just tie somebody up to prevent them from moving or escaping. It's as simple as that. Sensory bondage is if we inhibit one of the senses. It can be a blindfold or a gag or earphones in a sexual to stop that. Sexual bondage is at stake when it is unnecessary bondage. In other words, somebody's thighs are tied up. When there is a variety of positions like Moses who taught it, with the neck to the feet or the hands, wrist to the feet, when they tie them up hanging or upside down or spreading, when there's something weird about it. Also, we will see when it's sexual bondage, there is symmetry. They didn't just wrap it. It's neatly done with precision. It took time to tie them up. So, fetishism, then, is a sexual focus and arousal dependent upon an object It could be shoes, stockings, underwear. During the World War, it was gas marks, could be lycra, rubber, etc. So the person prefers to masturbate with the object than having actual contact sex, or else the object must be there during the sex with the person. Its origin, they say, is it develops during childhood and the object relates to a loved person. It manifests during adolescence. So the person can also experience frustration, anxiety. Now, Twala had a fetish for clothing. So if we return to the series, it is quite historically accurate that Micki and Erica was present during this arrest. That's historically accurate. And they were armed to the teeth. I still remember I refused to wear one of those bulletproof vests because it was too big for me. Couldn't run, I had to run, so I didn't wear bulletproof. And I was armed. What is not quite historically accurate is that the suspect fled and what happened thereafter, but makes for very good, compelling television series. So, in any case, once we reached his hut, we found that it was literally covered from the floor to the ceiling. There wasn't really a ceiling, from the floor to the roof with women's attire. Now, remember what I said previously. When do we consider something to be erotic collateral evidence? Is when there is too much of this. Now, Twala's whole room was full of female clothing. Clearly, this was a fetish. So it is also historically accurate that I interrogated him and that I secured a confession. It's not quite true that he practiced strangling somebody on me. He practiced it on one of the detectives. I was there, but kudos to Charlie, for acting this scene. It was really very, very convincing. So I often wondered, he demonstrated to the detectives how he would strangle somebody, the same as one of our previous killers demonstrated to the detective how he killed somebody. And I wondered, in this case, are they showing off to the detectives? Because for the first time in their lives, they have an authoritative male figure that is actually really interested in them and what they have to say. Because they never could identify with them. So they're showing off. Look, Daddy, look what I can do. I can kill somebody. So Sipho Twala told me that this little ball that he made and he put in her mouth, he said there was a woman, his girlfriend, that told him that she had aborted his baby. And that was the hurt that he had to keep on silencing people, not from hearing that. So he also told me that while he was sitting at the top there, overlooking these cane fields and tearing these strips of clothing, fantasizing, he was actually watching us, processing in the crime scenes. Life offers us many choices, many roads to take. As children, we learn to walk, not just physically, but also emotionally. We were created to move, to evolve, to explore, to seek the road of life. Some of us choose a road less traveled. Sometimes the sugar cane is so high we cannot see the ocean twinkling over the horizon, but it is there, beckoning. Twala was seduced by the sugarcane leaves caressing his face, the gentle rustle of the wind breezing through the cane, the smell of the earth, of soil, and when he sat there with his unconscious victim, plaiting the harness, taking his time to act out his fantasy, certainly remembering the words of the woman who had hurt him. But did he have to kill an innocent person to avenge himself? We all come to crossroads in our life. As I have said in the previous episode, as adults we have choices, and the choices we make have long-term consequences and ripple through many lives, like the breeze ripples through the cane fields. Hurtful acts towards children, negligence, not guiding them to learn consideration, not teaching them extension of gratification of needs, not teaching them to have compassion, indulging their whims and tantrums, may plant the seeds of narcissism, or worse, it may become pieces of the puzzle of the dynamics of a serial killer, who one day kills innocent people or the innocent children of other people. All serial killers had parents, adult family members, teachers, people with authority in their lives. Why did they fall through the cracks? What are we telling our children? Which road to take at the crossroads? There is a folklore belief that ghosts congregate at crossroads. Maybe they do. the ghosts of wrong choices. The crime scene I was processing when Twala had watched me in real life was number 11. A woman yet with no name, just victim number 11. This was the epitome of his fantasy, executed to perfection. Yet he did not stop after that. He carried on. He did not want to stop. And when I was on that crime scene, I did not know he was watching me. But what I did see was a tiny little purple flower, growing in the dark patch of the soil stained by the bodily fluids of the victim. Out of that darkness had grown light, something so courageous and so beautiful. And the girl with the divided heart knew she was going to reach a crossroad one day soon, where she had to make a choice. Sipho Twala was found guilty of 16 murders and 10 rapes and was convicted of 510 years in prison. Should never ever get out. In the TV series, as the detectives are celebrating, Micki moves out, away from them, to have a moment of reflection, and Mark calls her. And she apologizes that she had to leave him. Crossroads of choices. So join me next week in episode 10 of Micki Pistorius, Profiler on Record, where we meet a new serial killer had a very peculiar modus operandi and selection of victims. And you will see this in episode 10, which is the last episode of the television series Catch Me a Killer, based upon my book. But it will not be the end of our YouTube series, Micki Pistorius, Profiler on Record. So I will see you next week in the ultimate ending of Catch Me a Killer. So if you like what we are doing, please give us your thumbs up, please share it, subscribe, and I hope you find this inspirational, educational, and informative. And I will always give you an authentic account of my life and what it is like working with the minds of serial killers without sensationalizing them. Thank you very much. See you next week.
She was a girl with a divided heart, like the light and the dark, a divided heart. Between two continents and somewhere far home, but where it really lay was deep within her soul. But where it really